Hi there and welcome. My name is Ashley McNish. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the leaders of our book club, and I wanted to do a little haul video from my trip last weekend to the Southern Book Festival. So the Southern Book Festival takes place every year in Nashville, Tennessee. It's one of the oldest book festivals. Of course, I've been living down here in the South about 8.5 years and just came upon it this year. So I plan to make it an annual thing. If anyone ever wants to do a meetup, maybe that's something we could plan for next year. So I'm gonna get started first with a couple of bookish items, not books themselves. My husband and I just invested in the most expensive couch, or like first adult couch, I'd say. And when I saw this pillow, I was like, ooh, it can serve more than one purpose. It says Book Nerd. It has a pocket for your book. Mind you, this is almost a 700-page book, and it fits very comfortably. This is made by a company called Moo Studio, and they're out of St. Petersburg, Florida. And I will put their information in the notes in case anybody would like to find them and order this themselves. Okay. I also found this woman. She doesn't have a social media or anything. It's called Daisy Pearl though, and you can kind of see she made these earrings. This is the Great Gatsby book cover. I also have one that she made from Wuthering Heights, which is perfect for spooky season. And then my favorite, which I wore like all week last week, she also does portraits of specific authors. So that's Edgar Allan Poe. Another good one for spooky season, which is my favorite time of year. I have my Sanderson sister candle that my sister-in-law got me last Christmas. Then there is also, which I can put this person's information in the notes as well, Shelley Illustration. She makes these cute, it's like this cute little like pumpkin head girl and ghost and their friends. And right now it's just, she makes this beautiful artwork with it. I had to get this with the haunted house because haunted houses this time of year are one of my favorite things. That was the inspiration for my decorating this year outside. And her girlfriend told me, she wasn't there at the time when I ran by their booth, but she's working on like making kind of a Richard Scarry type children's book about these two friends. And so I'm excited. I'm definitely going to follow her on social media because I would love to kind of see what their story's about. She has tons of these with different spooky scenes. And I'm going to be putting that in my desk area. Okay, so those were everything that were kind of like the non-book themselves haul. I have a whole stack of books next to me right now. And I did my best to organize them by genre. I'm gonna start with The Night Watch. I hadn't heard of this one, but apparently it is a Pulitzer Prize winner. This is a historical fiction. It takes place around right after the Civil War, when the country is still healing. It is a little dark. it's about a woman and her daughter who get essentially put into, I don't want to call it an insane asylum, but it was, it was the birth of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia. And her husband had gone off to war, never came back. There's a little bit of trauma in the beginning. I have read a few chapters so far. It's really interesting, but the daughter and her go into the lunatic asylum to try to heal her because it's very apparent in the beginning that the mom has suffered a lot of trauma. And it's all about their life in the asylum together. The daughter acts like the mom is disguised as an upper class woman, and the daughter fronts herself like as her mom's servant. So they're trying to not have that mom-daughter relationship very obvious. The daughter is young, probably around 12 years old, and wants to get her mom healing. But there's different characters within the asylum that they interact with. So I feel like, yes, it's a historical fiction, but it's also kind of like perfect for spooky season, just because of the setting of the story. And I do love historical fiction, and I do love the Civil War, so I'm very interested for this one, but also I think I have to just be prepared that it might be a little dark. Okay, the next book, The Road from Belhaven, takes place in the 19th century still, but in Scotland. It's by Margot Livesey, and this is kind of like a magical realism, I think. I would describe it. So this girl grows up on a farm with her grandparents in Scotland, and she has the ability to kind of see in the future. Unfortunately for her, though, she can't always see things that will benefit her own life in the future. And she gets married away to a man that I don't think, based on how the book is described, I don't think might be a good match. But there's a lot of like mystery and exploration, I guess, of her gifts within the book. And again, spooky season, I figured Scotland might be a really kind of like dark academia type setting. Okay, the next book is called The Magic All Around. This is by author Jennifer Mormon. This book is really much more like lighthearted than the last two, but still, it's a magical realism. I was fortunate enough to meet this author. So at the festival, you can buy books. You can hear authors talk about their books and get interviewed. You can have authors sign your books. So I actually had this author signed it for me, and we had a really wonderful conversation. And I love how she wrote "Look for the Magic" in the book. But basically, this one is about a girl named Maddie, who essentially grew up just like moving around with her mom. It was just her mom and her, and they never really stayed in one place until her mom passes away. And Maddie inherits this Victorian home, which what I love about this story is the home is a character itself. And it's a magical Victorian home. And her mom leaves her like these apparent just random tasks to do with her death. Also, Maddie was born on Halloween. So like one of the things that her mom left for her to do was to like throw herself a party on Halloween. And I think there's a little bit of romantic in there too. There is a boy that she reconnects with from her past that also comes back to the town where this house is. And so I feel like it's got a little more like warmth and magic. And yeah, I mean, I love magical realism, and the fact that it's a Victorian magical home and the home is a character is what excites me about this one. So our author for our book club, TJ Klune, was actually at the festival, and I'm really excited. I got to hear him speak and get interviewed as well. He also signed my book. If you can't see, it says "Be Kind." I told him this was our book club, and I think I was probably the only person in line with this book to be signed. Everyone had his newest book, which I also got and I'll talk about. But yeah, so is what I loved about going to the book festival, not only the books, obviously, but getting to hear the stories from the authors and what their inspiration was for writing the books, and just kind of getting a sense of who the author is as a human. And so he was really vulnerable about his childhood growing up, and how it was really hard for him growing up as a homosexual man in a very male-dominated family. And so writing stories was kind of like an escape for him. And so it kind of makes sense how it turned into fantasy. But he had a really big moral platform, and he talked about how he tries to bring that into his stories. This story in particular is because someone he was close to passed away, and it was his way to process grief. But I'll talk about the other two books that and kind of what his inspiration was for that one. So what was nice too, so Parnassus Books, which is a very well-known bookstore here in Nashville, author Ann Patchett owns the bookstore, and I've been to the store for other book talks. She'll sometimes invite authors to come and do one, and I went to her fantasy one a couple years ago. So they have a big tent there where you can purchase books, and this one was pre-signed by the author. So if you don't have time to maybe stand in the line, like his line was the longest one. And it took a while to get through, but it was well worth it. So the house in the Cerulean Sea, this is about a social worker, and he actually told me like he did a lot of interviews with actual social workers. And so the social worker named Linus gets assigned to go see about these children who are magical on this island. And it's a love story as well. So it's fantasy with the children all have powers, and they're magical, out of this world powers. But the person who kind of like oversees them, Linus and Arthur kind of fall in love. And so it's kind of a story about found family. What I did like too, oh yes, Chauncey. Okay, so TJ Klune talked about like how characters, and Jennifer Mormon did too, like how characters come to them kind of like before they even write a story, like they're real people or spirits or whatever, kind of nudging them along, and like they see them and talk to them. And so there's this character Chauncey. So he was like, I was just gonna write this standalone story and that was gonna be it. And he said that normally his characters, like he writes them and it's like it gets out of their system and then they go away and that's it. But Chauncey kept coming up even after he wrote this. And so he wrote the sequel, somewhere beyond the sea. And this story is more from Arthur's point of view. And so Arthur, so Linus at this time is like living on the island with Arthur. And Arthur is summoned, I guess, to like their government or whatever to make a public statement. I guess there's something that happened in his life that he had hidden, and now he's going public about it. And so again, like they're trying to protect these kids with these magical powers, and that's essentially all I know because I haven't read any of these books. But it was really cool to hear them talk about it, and I'm excited. This one is also signed. And then I have one more fantasy book. This one is called The Lost Story by Meg Schaffer. So she and Jennifer Mormon kind of like were co-interviewed. And so whereas Jennifer Mormon was magical realism, Meg Schaffer writes fantasy. Before this, though, interesting enough, she wrote very spicy romance stories. And then she wrote The Wishing Game. I think that came out last year or 2 years ago. And she's like, so what do you do when your publisher just loves the book and essentially wants you to make the same thing? But her inspiration for this was Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia. And she said she really wanted to make, because she loved like the Madeleine L'Engle books when she was younger, and she just like wanted to bring fantasy to adults and wanted it to be that cozy magical story that like you could lay in bed with a flashlight and read like throughout the night, and a cozy story. And so this is about two boys who go missing in a state park in West Virginia, and eventually they're found, and I guess we meet them as adults, and one of them doesn't really remember too much of like where they were or what happened, and the other one he becomes like an investigator, and he does remember, and then it happens again, and this time a young girl goes missing, and he's trying to help, I think it's her sister or someone in her family find her, because he knows that they were lost in like this like magical world. I guess that's where the Chronicles of Narnia come in. I know too, many of you know I'm obsessed with the Darling Desi videos, mostly because not only to me she's like a real life Anne of Green Gables, but she very much has very similar taste in books that I do. She said this was her #1 book, and she read this earlier in the year, and she made this video like maybe September. This is her favorite book all year. And so this is one I think would be really interesting to read, to kind of again get lost in fantasy. And I love Chronicles of Narnia. Like, how cool is that? Okay, so I have a few more books left. This one was a self-published one. So there were many tents too where people or like authors would come who were self-published, and you could meet them. This author was from Kentucky, and I had a really nice conversation with her, and she wrote me a nice note saying it's nice to meet me and everything. She did say this one's based on a true story, but this one again is, I think, good for spooky season. I can't tell if it's like a true crime or if there's magic involved, but essentially there's this character, Kayvon, and she's really close, like grew up, I think she was pretty much raised by her grandmother. And when her grandmother dies, she inherits this like abandoned property. And when she goes back to the property, like these haunting memories start to come back to her about time she spent there with her grandmother as a child. And so I guess they get stronger and stronger. And there's another character, Nathan, I guess she connects with. And they're just kind of trying to like unearth their past and get clarity around that. And maybe there's a love story with that too. The story is told from multiple characters' points of view. So I know there are chapters like Kayvon narrates, there's chapters Nathan does, and then I think maybe the grandmother as well. And it goes kind of between past and present. So I don't know. I was intrigued. The author is Sharon Wright. It's called Where Secrets Stay. Okay. This book is called The Caretaker by author Ron Rash. And he was actually the first book talk I went to. And he was such like, if you just thought of like a nice, charming, down-to-earth Southern gentleman, like he was just like, I feel like you could just go to have coffee with him and have really deep conversations. And he had a really good, just like stance on humanity and life. I know I wrote down like a quote that he said. And maybe I'll put it in the notes if anyone's interested, but it was just like such a good outlook on humanity. But anyway, The Caretaker, it takes place, I think in 1951. And what was interesting with him, there were, not only with what this story is about, but also the author's own life. He grew up, in Western North Carolina, outside of Nashville. And the main character in this story was really, was affected. He had caught polio as a child. My grandfather also had caught polio, but apparently the character in this was like way much of a worse case than what my grandfather had. And like it really kind of like deformed him and his face and the way he looked. And the section that he read, it reminded me kind of my grandfather's generation, because it was about this part in the book where Blackburn, who's the main character, is it's in 1951. He's like in like a little grocer or something with his father, and he's just like kind of talking about like how he's not sure how his father feels about him and all of that. And then at the end, his father he looks like he has like this tough exterior and everything, but he notices like this group of guys just like staring at his son, and he just goes up to them and pretty much is like, if any of you like keep staring at my son like that, like I'll beat you up. But like it's in a way that like Blackburn knew like that was his way, like he was protective of him because he loved him, and it was a way he felt loved by his dad. And my grandfather was definitely in a generation where it was really hard for men to just say I love you. And towards the end of my grandfather's life, like we would always say I love you, I love you. It's almost like a game to see if we could get him to say it. But the past few years of his life, he started saying it back. What happens is Blackburn ends up taking a job as a caretaker of the local cemetery, because it's very much like a quiet southern town, and like the townspeople kind of like they want to take care of each other, and they figure, well, that might be a job where Blackburn doesn't have to like interact with as many people and maybe feel like bad about how he looks or shy, and he can just kind of have like that, I don't know, that peace and quiet and feel like he has purpose and things like that. And he he has one friend, Jacob, and Jacob ends up having to go to war. And he asks Blackburn to watch over his wife, Naomi. And it gets to a point where they don't even know if Jacob's going to come back from the war. And Naomi and Blackburn become very close. And so it's kind of a story about friendship and betrayal. I don't know, like, I just feel like he talked about humanity really well, and I feel like maybe that comes across in the way he writes as well. This was very much based, he said, kind of like an ode to where he grew up. In West Virginia, in his town, there was a cemetery like right on the other side of his fence. And it was always his job, like, he said, like, if there was a storm, and I don't know if where you live, but in the South, people really, like, they come and they decorate the gravestones for every holiday. And so if there'd be a storm and all the decorations or the flowers would flow over onto their property, it was his job to go clean it up and bring it back. And so there's, you know, a little spooky to it too. The fact that the cemetery is the setting for much of this book. But I don't know, I feel like it feels like it's like an ode to humanity in a way, and I'd be interested to read it. So this one, there was somebody who was selling, like, he had a whole tent and like all the books were $5. And Frederick Bachman is an author I tend to come back to multiple times. I read A Man Called Ova. It was like the grandmother one. Yeah, My Grandmother Asked You to Tell You She's Sorry, which was one of my favorite ones. I read Beartown. And so this book takes place, this is Britt Maria was here, in the same world where My Grandmother Asked You to Tell You She's Sorry. So it's the same characters. Britt Marie was a character in that book. And she's just gone through a divorce. She's a very type A person, and can sometimes come across as like critical and judgmental of other people. But really, like, deep inside, she has a big heart and a lot of imagination, and she's just coming to a place in her life where she's starting fresh, and she moves to this small town, and it's just kind of like, I don't know, like, where she's just finding herself. Again, kind of another ode to like humanity and you know, where we might go to dark places and come out of them and find ourselves again. And so I feel like, I don't know, I always felt like a connection to Britt Marie. I had, not that my mom was like extremely judgmental or whatever, but like, you know, like the way British, like everything has to like look perfect or be clean. And I feel like I'm very much like a recovering perfectionist. And so I don't know, I just feel for her, and I kind of want to see a story where she does come out on top. And so this has been on my TBR for a long time. So when I saw it and it was $5, I was like, all right, that just must be a sign that I need to read that this year. Okay, so 2 more like adult books. So this is a fiction, The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This was another author I got to see, and I got this in the Parnassus tent. It was already signed, but look at this page. Like the cover page, I think it's so beautiful, and with like the light shining in the woods, and then she signed in like a silver Sharpie. So this is, she talked about how she grew up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. She's lived in Philadelphia for a while now. This is the author. Philadelphia is a big city for my family. That's where my parents grew up and my grandparents lived. I decided to go hear her talk because this just kept popping up. Like whenever I was looking for a book to read, I was like, all right, I'm going to hear the author talk about it and then decide if I really want to read it. And she talked about how she kind of has this like interest in exploring like the differences in the classes. And so she really went into kind of like how around the Gilded Age, the very wealthy elites in New York City kind of started taking over the Adirondacks as like a place to go like hunting and all of that. But then there's like the class system because there are people that lived there and like they needed those woods like to survive. And so kind of like she wanted to explore that a little bit. And so there was this family, the Van Laars family, and they're very wealthy and, you know, have their summer home in the Adirondacks. And there's a camp there. And I guess it's a camp that like the wealthy send their kids to. And she, their daughter, Barbara Van Laar, goes missing. And apparently, like years ago, 14 years ago, Barbara's older brother went to the same camp and also went missing. So there's a little bit of mystery, but then it's also like an upstairs, downstairs story. Like if I was thinking like, you know, like the people that serve the wealthy, the blue collar people in the town, and then the really wealthy people in the town. She also brought up, because it was based off a camp. She got the idea because she did go to a summer camp up there growing up. And there was, I guess in the 70s, I want to say, like a serial killer or something in the area. And so she did say she like made like a spooky ghost story about that in this one too. So still might be good for spooky season. And yeah, so it's The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. And then finally, here's a fiction book, The Wedding People by Alison Esbach. What caught me was the setting of this initially, because it takes place in Newport, Rhode Island. And I am obsessed with that town. Like I said, like I love Victorian, Gilded Age. I don't know, I'm just intrigued by that time period. And so all the mansions and everything, but this takes place in modern times. And our protagonist, Phoebe, is, I believe, newly divorced. My sister did say there's just like a content wording around infertility in this book. And so she had always imagined going to Newport with her husband. And she shows up, I guess, anyway, to just try to heal. And there's a wedding going on, and she just kind of becomes this unexpected guest, and keeps connecting with the bride. And I guess she has some sort of plan, but I don't know what that is because it's just based on what I read about it. But I guess it's kind of like the purpose of it is like those moments in life that are unexpected, and certain people come into your life and just change it and reroutes our direction. And so I was kind of intrigued by that too, to kind of see like what is Phoebe's plan? Like, why is she so like drawn to this bride? Like, is it like she's trying to like ruin the wedding? I don't know. But then yeah, they like confide in each other and almost have like this like, I don't know if it's friendship, but some sort of relationship. So yeah, those are all of the books that I found in terms of like fiction books to read. But then there was also like a children's section. So essentially like any kind of book you possibly want to read. They had an app too, which was really nice because it kind of helped you to know what time certain authors were speaking and things like this. But this was a children's book, again, signed, and it's called I'll Meet You in My Dreams. And it's just the story of a mother and a child, like from the child's birth to like when the mom passes away, but is still kind of with them in spirit. And it goes through like the whole lifespan, but it's just like, it's beautifully written. The pictures are beautiful. And you know, like this is like, I'll be a lighthouse and you'll be a ship. You'll set your sails and take a trip across the briny sea. And it's like how they're connected and like how the parent is gonna stay with them. And I don't know. I just thought this is beautiful for any age. Like whether you wanted to give somebody who's having a child this book, or even like something to share with your mom for Mother's Day, or yeah, it was a really beautiful book. And then finally, Baking in the American South. And actually, this author, Annie Byrne, she was there to speak, but it was on the second day. I went Saturday. And there were a couple authors in the books that I have that spoke on Sunday, but I just couldn't get to Nashville that day. But what I loved about this is I do love to bake. I've lived in the South, again, almost 8.5 years. And I was just like, there are just some recipes like I didn't grow up with that I would like to learn how to bake. But what's really cool about this book is not only are there recipes, but there's like a little bit of history behind like the South and like the recipes and like why maybe they use certain ingredients that they used. And there's just like tons. I think there's even like a president who has a recipe in here. But like each recipe, it has like a story about the person and then how to make it. And also for those of you who have ever been to Dollywood and know about the cinnamon bread that they sell there, there's the recipe in this book for the Dollywood cinnamon bread. And you can make it, like I try to bake gluten-free. It's something I'm still exploring. But it does have like ideas for how to change the recipes if you're gluten-free and dairy in the front of the book for what you could use to substitute. And they do make fabulous one-to-one baking flour that's gluten-free these days. So I am excited. I actually went with my husband. We have a dry goods store in our town, which is very cool because I get to feel like I live in the 1800s and go there. But it's literally a dry goods store. And you can get your flour and your beans, and they're all like organic and everything. But we went there and we got the ingredients to make sure that we had what we needed, because the first recipe I will make is the Dollywood cinnamon bread. So that is everything that I experienced at the Southern Book Festival. I hope that you enjoyed the book. I hope I was able to provide some background knowledge on what some of the stories are about. If there are any that you're interested in, just please comment, whether you're using Fable or Facebook, and we will try to choose something for our November selection. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.